Let me ask you rather.
Yeah.
I'm an individual contributor, and the way I individually contribute is by writing the code, right? And when things are feeling deadliney, funny how those it can actually move a lot. When things are feeling deadliney, I feel pressure to, make it happen and start doing trade-offs with what I think I can do in the time I think I can do it, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, I've got a lot of direct control over that. Like, it either will or won't be appropriately delivered by my estimation. How does it look from your side, Mr. Product Manager? Uh, I imagine, I'll guess, how could you possibly have anxiety about it? You're either right or you're wrong, and your job is to manage risk. There's some techniques you can do to be less wrong, right? But you don't have a whip, and maybe you can do some culture stuff. So what does it look like from the PM side to deal with dead not the stress, emotional stress, but like navigating it and your power over it and wait, do you get the flavor of question I'm asking you here?
I think so. I mean, to address some of what you said, I mean, definitely get stressed. You can't just throw engineers under the bus because that harms your relationships with the engineers. And so it impacts, like, I'm trying to think of a term for this, but it's almost like you get like a margin out of an engineer. And when you are operating on like high margins with the engineer, that's like I ask for a little, they provide a lot. And then some when you're operating with low margins, it's like I ask for a lot and they're providing a little. And if you harm your relationship with your engineers, then you're gonna see your margins dip. You're gonna start getting less from your engineers for what you ask. Um, and there are times when I'd say like times are good and you're like, oh, could, if you get a minute, this is not super urgent, but maybe if you get a minute, could you maybe do this thing? And the engineer's like, oh, hell yeah. And then they go and they do something that's 10 times better than what you asked for. And it doesn't impact the other stuff that they were working on. Like they're able to really kind of figure out a way to make it happen. That's like a high margin situation. And I feel like you get those more often when you have a strong relationship with your engineers. So, knowing that, you can't just go to your boss and be like, yeah, I don't know why it's taken so long. Not my problem. The engineers are slow, you don't want to just throw your engineers under the bus and try to make them look bad. So you take as much responsibility as you can for the deadline. Like, oh, like we were planning this, something came up. We're trying to get back on track as quickly as we can. And, it looks like we're not going to hit that Friday deadline, but maybe we can get it done by next Wednesday. We're really going to push to get it done by next Wednesday. You have that kind of narrative, but it is stressful. I mean, because you're making a promise that, like you said, I'm not directly in control of. So I have to have a lot of trust in the engineer, and I don't want to just make up something that is going to be equally as impossible as the first thing we failed to do. So I want to at least talk to the engineer and get an idea like, hey, I ask a question like, hey, if I say that we're going to shoot for this next week, like, is that super unreasonable of me? Am I being, rash? Am I not being reasonable? And if they're like, yeah, yeah, that's cool. Sometimes they'll say like, yeah, that's not going to happen, man. And I'm like, all right, well, good. Then I won't say that. Thanks for letting me know. So what can we, maybe reasonably say? And that's when I'll try to say, I try to push on like the 80% confidence interval kind of thing. There was another piece of this that I thought was kind of useful. You, as an engineer, are going to help your PM if you tell them earlier than later that you're not going to hit a deadline. Like, what hurts me the most is when I have a certain expectation, and based on that expectation I make certain commitments, or I project like a certain level of confidence. Like, yeah, the engineer said it would be done by Friday. It's Wednesday. They haven't told me anything is off track. Friday's it. And then on Thursday they're like, hey man, so I took the liberty to adjust scope a little bit here because I'm not gonna be able to get all of this done by Friday, but I can get this and this done. And I'm like, okay, That's not a terrible decision. Like, that's probably the right scope to cut, but it's going to be way harder for me to now tell that story with, 1 day before our deadline where we anticipated we get 100% of the scope. So, at that point as a PM, the stress becomes like, how do I give this narrative? Like, how do I tell this story in a way that is going to be like, oh, yeah, like we got here and it's not, the engineer didn't fuck us, when they maybe did. Like, maybe they should have told me. Maybe they kind of fucked me there a little bit. But I can't say that because that's the same problem as the beginning. I can't just throw them under the bus. So I got to be like, look, I talked to them and I have to come up with like a legitimate reason why this happened, when the reason is maybe a miscommunication between the engineer and myself. And I think the way to try to prevent that is to be like really communicative with your engineers and let them know early and often, like, hey man, if this thing is looking like it's not going to work out or we're going to have to cut scope to hit that deadline, you got to tell me, and you got to tell me early, and we will come up with the right plan together to adjust scope, and then I can communicate it. And the earlier I can communicate that, the better it'll be received. I don't know
I
if that's a good answer to your
No,
question.
it
It
was
was
a
a
great
broad answer.
answer as defined by the conversation brings up a good answer as well anyway. So I've got a couple reflections and a
Mm-hmm.
question. One, margin sounds an awful lot like an Attaboy economy derivative. Your Attaboys
Yeah.
with your engineers, although it pays dividends to have that with them, and then you can what have Attaboy on margin with your engineer. I don't know. But so that was interesting. I was also watching for it, and I heard you say what you're producing, and it could be formulated as something like the story. You have to craft the story. You have to craft the narrative. You have to integrate the systems and keep in sync the systems of expectation and reality and that risk management. It's not just that you're a go between because the stakeholder can't be bothered to hunt down updates. When you were talking about it, I had a vision of you being a system administrator, no, a site reliability engineer, watching load on your systems and being like, oh man, no, the load's getting too high and my monitoring was unreliable. And we need to make sure the monitoring's there so that I can, subvert and overload, for example, and that your peopleware ops,
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what was running in my head. And that you, for example, you do in fact have a crunch time construction of the narrative. You have a, oh man, the deadline was Friday, and if you've been, hitting a sustainable pace and managing your risk correctly, you're not going to have to crunch, but something might pop up, not unlike what happened to the developer if they weren't just on YouTube, um, or Twitter or whatever they're doing these days. Now yourself have a crunch time deliverable of this narrative construction, and it's landing in production, if I may. Is any of that landing? Is that fun?
Yeah, I think that is pretty fun. And to add to that, even maybe using the analogy, if stakeholders, and not just stakeholders as in like in my case, working on internal tools, it's a lot of like internal employees, but also like the the board really is kind of like a end goal audience for my narrative. It's like they want to know what we're spending all of this engineering money on, right? And if the answer is like, well, look at these PRs, look at this raw output from the engineers, they're going to be like, what the fuck does that mean? Like, what are we getting though for realsies? And it's kind of like, to use your analogy, it's like, no, dude, look at how performant this server is. It is screaming. It is incredible. Look at the RAM. Look at the processor in this thing. And the person who's trying to keep their business online is going to be like, I don't fucking care. I want my website online. When the users come, I want the website to work, and I don't want to see errors, and I want my orders to be processed, and I don't want things to just be black holed, and my shit is not working right now. And I'm like, I know, but the server is performing extremely well. And it's like they don't fucking care, you know? So you have to in our case, like, you know, because I know we both share some of that experience telling some of those stories and troubleshooting those issues. It's like, yeah, you kind of have to explain something in a way of like, okay, look, I know your website is down. The server is doing well, so that's not the problem. But it does look like there might have been like a software issue here that we can address to try to, you know, which in this analogy, maybe that's something like communication rather than, you know, the performance of an engineer. I don't mean to go too wild with the analogy, but yeah, I think it's valid, you know, and a lot of the work that I'm doing, not that it could never be replaced by like, you know, AI or something that watches engineers really closely and tells a great story and somehow communicates development to leadership in a way that they can comprehend without being toxic, I guess, toward the engineers. Because to me, that's a big part of it is like web development, software development is complex. And I don't expect everybody from upper management to a board to really understand how that process takes place. Like, I don't expect every business owner to understand how the server that's running their website works. They just have an expectation for outcomes. And so you have to communicate in their terms. And you know, engineers aren't always the best at doing that either. It's also like a lot of effort, I think, is the thing, right? So, like, there's overhead. So, it takes a lot of work to communicate things in those terms. And if you're busy trying to actually build the fucking thing, then it's a big burden on you to turn around and communicate how that process takes place. So, you know, having a guy like me around to be like, no, no, you stay busy and I will help leadership understand what we're doing and what they're going to get out of it. And it doesn't matter so much, you know, what the engineer's day to day looks like or what PRs they got up or whatever. So you're communicating more in terms of like user stories or something like that, which like not that I use a perfect format, but that's really what it is. I mean, that's what it turns out to. It's like, hey, you now, as the user, like you can do this thing now. And that's all they really care about. They don't really care at all about the productivity of the engineers. But if you go too long without something new that the users can do or some, you know, positive outcome, then eventually they're going to blame you and then the engineers and be like, why is nobody working around here? You know, so you got to
Well,
maintain.
it is funny building something new because I as well was thinking like even yesterday what developers are building, at least in a web experience, is they are building a factory where the browser is a way to submit requests into that factory for processing, and out comes the finished product. And so they are committing parts to the factory. The server, I imagine, it's a data factory. Data in, factory, data out, and it produces formations of data. And just it's interesting that you need to see the factory spit out different things. It's not enough just to keep it on.
Yeah.
There's an infinite, insatiable demand for functionality because there's infinite ways in which data not only could be formulated, but multiple ways, even in the same formation, in which it could be applied to some case. So what I'm doing at work right